by something rather than nothing. In other words, how can I be on this verge of nothingness? Can I ever survive? You see. So looking through the existential, what? Dread, terror, anguish, to ask what it uncovers. And similarly in some of the other of his writings, similar sorts of things. But his major work, published in 1927, is called Being and Time. Notice how significant the title is. You see, being and time. So the title is Sein und Zeit. Now being, sure, he wants to get at the nature of being. Time, yeah, the temporality of our existence, of our conscious existence in this world, that's what's likely to uncover the existential qualities and stir them up. You see. And in any case, in the Kantian tradition, it's time which structures our conscious existence of anything. So what then is revealed in this? Now when I say in our being, what is revealed in that, he's not saying what can we infer from it, Descartes style. You see, it's not that he's trying to take mental representations and do a causal inference. No, but do we have a direct awareness of the ground of being in the consciousness of our own existence? You see. When you hit rock bottom, is there something there? That's what he's asking. Well, his big project in Being and Time then was a phenomenology of design. His intention was to describe these existentialia, the universal structures of consciousness that being in this world. Universal aspects of it, revealing structures. He only completed half of the project. Part one, which has to do with temporality and our being, Dasein. Part two, which was to have to do with temporality and being itself, Sein, he never got done. Why not? Well, it's usually said because he became convinced that this wasn't the method to use. And so it was only half done. The question seems to have been something like this. Even granted that something like being itself is disclosed in our conscious being, how are we going to interpret that? How are we going to understand it? Time may be the structure of our being in the world, but is it the structure of being itself? However would we know? You see? And so he feels that we need to get a more direct kind of approach towards being itself. And that's where he turned to more existential ways, like the why is there something than nothing question, or to going back to all pre-scientific and pre-philosophical vocabulary to early Greek before the rise of philosophy to see if there's something that shows itself in the language of the early Greeks. And he does all sorts of interesting etymologies. Trying to get at that. For instance, he asks himself in a little essay called On the Essence of Truth, what is truth? And the etymology that he uses repudiates the conventional view of truth as the correspondence between thought and thing, or as Aquinas put, the adequation of thought to thing, repudiates that. And etymologically looks at the Greek word aletheia, says there's the alpha privative that negates, and here's the word for a stone or a rock. So truth is saying something about no stone? Yeah, that is to say the rock, the stones are all rolled away, and now you can see what's under them. So truth is the nature of something that shows itself. You see? That is to say, what appears, the being that appears to you in your own existential moment. That is true. And interestingly, how that coincides with our phrase, a moment of truth. A moment of truth. You see, in which you were forced to reveal the sort of person you were. You revealed it to yourself in that moment of truth. Well, let me come back to being and time, however, and a few comments about some of the things he does there, which I think are particularly important. One of the things that immediately becomes evident is that in trying to describe Dasein, one's being in the world, one's conscious existence, inevitably he uses the word I. Yeah, as any of us would. He's first person. Or perhaps the word you. You see. But he's using the word I not in the sense of a unique individual. But the I is conceived as universal. That is to say, he's looking for the universal dimensions of I-ness, of the hyphen. The universality there, not the idiosyncrasy, but the universality. The I is universal. Now, you say that's odd, not if you've read Hegel. Because in Hegel, what you find is that the I, the individual, is a synthesis of the universal and the particular. Remember, in his logic, you move from universal to particular to individual. So the individual is the concretized universal, what Hegel called the concrete universal. Universal possibilities, universal characteristics concretized in the individual. So the I is universal. Now, it seems to me that's a very important notion. Because if you're trying to find universal points of reference in response to relativism, pluralism, and so forth, what he's saying is that even though you may examine the individual, there's something universal about every individual. No, the universal is not just an empirical generalization about particulars. You see, it's not something you deduce from a collection of particulars. It's something that appears within the particulars. So that you can say that there are certain universal human characteristics of a skeletal thought, which get fleshed out in particular ways in individuals. So the universal and the individual are not separate things. The universal appears in the individual, which is why being can appear within our being in the world, because ours is a particular manifestation of being itself. The I is a concrete universal. He uses the word facticity to describe the experience of being sort of a bare fact, insignificant, just an object in this kind of world. He uses the term Vorhandensein to describe the status of something which is just an instrument, a tool used by others. Vorhandensein is to be on hand, something that's on hand, just there to be used. And obviously for human existence, they're very inauthentic kinds of existence. He uses the term existentiality to refer to the possibilities inherent in human existence. Possibilities inherent in human existence. The freedom to be. That is contained in human existence. He uses the term forfeiture and fallenness to speak of the experience of forfeiting the kinds of possibilities that human existence involves. He speaks of conscience in those terms, and the term being unto death, significant. As if there's intentionality in all consciousness, then the consciousness of our own existence, of our own life, existence, is, among other things, a consciousness of being unto death. Time's running out for all of us. You know, the existential quality there, being unto death. He speaks of Mitsein. There's another such universal feature. Mitsein is literally being with, togetherness. Yeah, that's prior to being alone. We're basically relational beings. Our conscious existence is always related, our identity is always related to that of others. Mitsein. As Martin Buber says, I, thou, hyphenated, is prior to I. Yeah. Mitsein is prior to just the self. But the particular thing that might be worth noting is that he regards, how he regards understanding and language. Because here you get that postmodern theme coming through again. Understanding is a way we have of projecting the meaning of our design onto objects.